Drinking on the job. Good evening, everybody. Back to the live Friday night chats. And hopefully there's a lot of you out there because tonight is a pretty special one for me. Kind of a contrast versus the great conversation that I had last week with Riley, or 2 weeks ago with Riley, a young lady doing great stuff in our area, which we had to be stopped talking by Ian on that particular conversation because it just got interesting and deeper, and I learned so much more about her. But tonight's a different end of the spectrum, if you will. A pretty good friend of mine, and certainly someone that I look up to and regard as a great influence on the stuff I've done, particularly in vineyard work, in dry farming, et cetera, et cetera. It's David Gates from Ridge Vineyards. David and I have hung out in vineyards and the wineries, tasted wines, looked at grapevines, all of that stuff, and he's been a wealth of knowledge for me, particularly amongst the organic stuff, and of course the dry farming, which he's been doing for a long time. And tonight we're going to taste some really special wines. I mean, he and Ridge were really generous to send me a bottle of the 2011 Monte Bello Cabernet wine, which, I mean, it's got to be, if not the most famous of American wines, it's up there. Ridge is I'm a groupie. It's one of my 2 wine club memberships. I've been a fan forever. I have immense respect for everybody up there, all the winemaking team. Of course, Paul Draper has been an icon in our business and remains so. And my Bob Haas, my employer, the guy that hired me, unfortunately passed away now, but good friends with Paul and had nothing but immense respect for him. So I'm a huge fan of Ridge, and I'm stoked to be tasting their wine. So we're going to taste the Monte Bello. We're going to taste a Carignan of a younger vintage. We're going to tie the Monte Bello with the Tablas Creek Panoplie 2011, and then we're going to have the Complice. So there it is. That's where we're going. That's who we're talking to. So let's bring David in and start chatting. Hey, David.
Hi, Neil. How are you?
Like you said earlier, I'm hot.
Yeah, same here.
Been a bruising couple of days, and it's about to get even hotter down here.
I think so. This weekend's going to warm up, but then hopefully they say it's supposed to cool down.
Let's hope so. Are you in Monte Bello, or are you up
Monte Bello? Yeah.
Okay.
I'm up at about a little over 2,300 feet. So it didn't get cool last night. This morning, I think I was telling you it was 81 degrees. That was our low.
Oh, wow.
It made it up to 94, I think, 93, 94, and now it's about 88. But it's hot and dry.
Like, I woke up to Tablas Creek being 67 or 68, and I don't know where it got. Last time I looked, it was 101 point something. At that point, I don't need to look anymore. I'm just going inside and hope everything's all right out there.
Exactly. Well, it's just hot.
Thanks for doing this. I know you do a lot of this stuff, and thanks for sending that wine. I opened it and decanted it earlier, and it did not disappoint. I look forward to hearing your take on it.
Oh, it should be fun.
Again, I mean, all of this is to introduce you to the Tablas faithful. That, I mean, I can't imagine that people don't know who you are and what you do, but a lot of your vineyard stuff, the general public probably don't know. So let's talk about you for a little bit. What your history is with Ridge, because it's been a while, right?
Yeah, I'm old, Neil.
Yeah.
I started at Ridge in 1989. So this will, if I always say, if I survive it, this will be my 33rd vintage. So
33rd vintage.
Yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah, that is cool. When you started, what was the size of the team at Ridge?
So, believe it or not, we're just a little bit larger than what we were in 89.
Really?
Our vineyard sources have changed quite a bit. We were about 10% of our production was Monte Bello. That's a little bit higher today, but not a whole lot higher. And our estate vineyard acreage was, about 10% of what we did. In the interim years now, we're at 75% estate production. So, by hook or crook, we're able to either purchase some properties or do some long-term leases with Lytton Springs and Geyserville. And of course, on Monte Bello, we've expanded Monte Bello to almost a little over 140 acres now.
Wow.
Up and down the hill. Yeah.
And that's probably, though, I'm guessing, I don't know this, but I'm guessing you do more labels than you did in 1989, right? Is that
yeah. We kind of went crazy the last couple of years. I think we're going to pare it back some. We're at 42, I think. Of
my word.
19 vintage, 42 labels. Some of them very, very small productions, right? But 19 was a big year for us. So we not only did we make a really nice and a beautiful large selection of Monte Bello and estate Cabernet, but we were able to do what we love to do in a large vintage, is peel off some single cuvee Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Petit Verdot, Merlot. That's really nice. Just to do little one-offs of a few hundred cases.
So who gets to get to taste those things?
So our wine club members and people that come to visit the wineries. So yeah.
And you have an array of wine clubs, right? I mean,
yes, yeah, we have the collector, the Monte Bello collector. So that's of course for Monte Bello's. Monte Bello, we sell it to direct to wholesale or direct to retail and futures. So it's a great deal. The consumers give us their money 6 months after vintage, and then they get the wine a year and a half later. And but they get a good discount on it. I think they get it for about 2/3 of the cost of it or something. But we get that money, right? It's
right.
It works out really well.
Finance the program.
Yeah, exactly right. So that's the collector program. And then we have the ATP, which is, as far as we know, one of the oldest tasting clubs, wine programs in the industry, and it started in the 70s. So it's and that's fun because it's Zin dominant. About half the wines are Zin or Zin blends, but then we also do a little bit of Rhône wines, and then bits and pieces like this year we're going to get some Valdegui, which our grower up in Napa. The Frediani's, they still call it Napa Gamay, which is, it's misnomer. Yeah. So we're gonna make that for the wine club. So that should be really fun.
Got a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
And back in '89, though, you didn't have the Lytton Springs place, because I remember that being built at the time. I believe it was the largest straw bale construction in the world, I was told.
Yeah.
Stuccoed or coated with vineyard soil as a main component. Is that correct?
Yeah. So that was really fun. We basically had to teach the Sonoma County Building Department that it's post and beam construction, and the infill is rice straw bales, but they freaked out. So that was fun trying to get that permitted. And yeah, and the vineyard soil is a mix of clay. We have a little bit of 50-ish 45% clay soil that we found. We dug that out and mixed it with rice straw that was chopped up really fine, and then sand, and that became the stucco mix for the outside and the inside of the straw bales.
And how is that held up in a winery environment?
Really good. So on the outside, the biggest issue is if you have direct water, like we had a little micro sprinkler blow up and squirted water on it. So after, a half an hour, whatever, until we found out, it kind of bored a hole into the, or a northern flicker, a woodpecker came and decided at one point to make a nest. And so, we started hammering into the stucco. So I got a flicker nest to put it up there, and then it hammered into that instead of the.
How funny.
Yeah, it was really funny. On the inside, I was very skeptical. They did a whitewash of basically quicklime. They did seven or eight coats of quicklime, and the last 2 or 3 coats, we added some vineyard soil to it, vineyard dirt to it, to give it a color. So it mimics the brownish red. And I was really skeptical, but that's held up beautifully. So you have to realize, though, that when we have our barrel rooms. We stack our barrels, and they'll stay in that, those big long stacks that we have. They'll stay there for 5 years, something like that. So there's not a lot of contact with the outside, for people hitting it with hoses or anything. So you have to be careful with it, but it's held up really well. I'm totally impressed. And the good thing about it is it breathes, so the straw stays dry enough, but moisture doesn't build up, and it works out really well.
Yeah, I love that form of construction. I've never built a legitimate building like that, but I've built a barn at Tablas Creek, and one of our pump houses was the first one I built, and just really a great form of construction. I'd love to build a home, or a winery would be interesting. There's a Claiborne and Churchill down here, who's, I think, one of the first wineries to do that form of construction. Of course, the insulation value is insane. I mean, it's incredible. Awesome. Yep. Incredible feel to it. So, I mean, you're mostly in the vineyard, though, right? I mean, that would be fair to say.
Absolutely. That's my job, vineyard operations. So yeah.
Up and down.
Yep. Oh, sorry.
Up and down the coast. I mean, you come down here once in a while for Ducey.
I sure do. Yeah, for Benito Ducey's vineyard. What Mike Ducey, his nephew's doing a great job of farming it since Benito had passed 2 years ago now. Boy, time flies.
Wow.
Yeah. And then we also are doing a little Grenache Blanc in your area. Adelaida sells us a little bit of fruit, and that's been really fun. It's a nice alternative to our Santa Cruz Mountains Chardonnay.
Totally, and it's the soils on that ranch are incredible. Like a lot of limestone, and
oh my God,
I worked at Adelaida before Tablas Creek. They didn't have all of that planted when I was there, but I knew the property really well. It's the old HMR property, I believe, and just incredible soils, incredible limestone. I've worked with a little bit of the Grenache Blanc before Ridge took it all.
Sorry.
No, that's not true. We've made some Roustan from there, which is super fun.
Mm-hmm.
So Ridge is, you're a lot of dry farming, right? And a lot of lean towards the organic. Yeah,
we're actually the largest organic growers, certified organic growers in the Santa Cruz Mountains, which, it's not that's a low bar, because the Santa Cruz Mountains, I think there are like 1,500 acres total in the appellation, and we farm 140 of it. So that's no big deal, but it's important. Yeah.
It's always a big deal. Does it rub off the neighbors, do you think?
Yeah, for sure. Cooper Garrett is certified organic. It's a lot of people they farm organically, but they don't get certified, right? And I always preach, well, then you're not really organic, you're not certified. But
it's paperwork. Some people.
Yes, it's a lot of paperwork. Yeah, it can be. And up in Sonoma, we're the largest growers of certified organic grapes in Sonoma County too. So acreage wise, so that's kind of neat.
Both through your estate stuff and I guess the long-term lease stuff is considered estate, right?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. So far we have a couple of our growers that have certified organic grapes. And another one in Sonoma, Andy Furlong, he's going through the process. And one initiative that Sonoma County decided to do a few years ago is the big sustainability push along with the Wine Institute. And everybody in Sonoma really kind of jumped on board with that. So that was a nice push, because they realized that it is a certification process. It follows a little bit like Lodi rules or the SIP program that you guys have, where you just go through steps. You have different areas of your operations, and then they realize, well, it's really not that onerous. There's if you just do it, and it kind of, once you've gone through the farm plan, then you're pretty much done. It doesn't take much time each year. So that's opened up a lot of people's eyes to maybe doing a little bit more, like certifying organic.
I think, just getting people to make one step at a time is the important thing. But so when you first started in '89, was that as a vineyard guy?
Yes. Yeah. I was hired as the first official vineyard manager for Ridge at Monte Bello. So they'd had the consulting vineyard manager, who's good friend, Fred Peterson, has his own winery up in Sonoma. He was coming down, and we have the same ranch foreman, Rafael Dorado, this would be his 38th vintage.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. And so they hired me to kind of just take over, run the program. And then we were lucky enough to take a lease out on the Whitten Ranch that makes our Geyserville up in Alexander Valley in Sonoma County, purchase the Lytton Estate East, which is where the winery is, and then purchase Lytton Estate West in 95. And then in 95, we also took a lease out on the Jimsomere Ranch. So that became a state property. And so little by little, we've added acreage as we can.
So, I mean, maybe this is a good thing for people to understand is when you say you took a lease out so it became a state, what is the rule on that? Because, I mean, I think a lot of people see a state as being just, around the winery or owned by the winery or whatever. It's an odd term.
Yes, it is. So when you say estate, it means that you kind of the winery is in charge of growing those grapes. So you basically, when you take an agricultural lease out on a piece of property, you're taking over the agricultural risk from the owner. So that and the way we write our leases is we come up with a term, X amount of dollars per acre that we pay the landlord. There's an inflation clause in there and everything. So they basically get paid every year for the land, but we take on the agricultural risk. So we're responsible for farming the grapes, for planting new grapes, for, whether we get fire, knock on wood, or a bad crop or a good crop, we get that. So and they become estate grapes.
Make money from their land without much of the risk.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Yeah.
So here Frank's asking, how many acres of vines does Ridge have compared to Tablas? A lot. Tablas the original Tablas property is 120 acres. We bought the contiguous 160 almost a decade ago, of which we'll farm 50, and we probably have 110 planted at the original Tablas property. So, we have a total of 280. But not planted under grapes. That'll end up at about 150, 160.
That's awesome. Yeah.
What have you got? What's the ridge?
So we have 142 acres at Monte Bello, and we have some more land that we have a agricultural easement on. That gets complicated, but and that's we have another 15 or so acres. So we'll be over 155 acres
at Monte
Bello in about 6 years. In Sonoma, between Lytton Springs and Geyserville, we have 320 acres. So
a lot.
Of grapes, and a little bit more in land, but
right.
Yeah.
And how much of that is head trained and dry farmed, would you say?
Oh gosh, almost all of it. The only stuff that isn't head trained is about 20 acres worth of Syrah, and then we have a little bit of Zinfandel. We're experimenting again with putting it on cordon along with some Grenache and Cinsault and Counoise for rosé, just to try. We just planted 4 acres of rootstock on wire, and we don't know what we're going to bud it to yet. So we're still. I'm hoping it's going to be some Rhône whites, but we don't know yet.
Where is it?
Still? That's at Lytton Springs. Yes.
Right. Rhône white.
Yep.
Think about Bourbelanc, perhaps.
I think that would be awesome. Yeah, it'd be really good. Yeah.
And the early bottlings we've made is showing to be really good. So Olivier asking, did Ridge purchase cuttings from Tablas Creek? Well, probably not, because they don't do a lot of Rhônes. I mean, we don't do Zin, so there's I don't think so. Maybe you did. Did you buy any Grenache?
So we never did, Neil, purchase from the nursery, but we certainly have used the budwood that you sent through Nova Vine, and and when they were doing it. So we have several of the clones.
Nice.
Yeah, and they're beautiful too, especially the Mataro clone or Mourvèdre. We call it Mataro. That's the old California term. Yeah, sorry. I guess really it's if we use your clone, then it's Mourvèdre. So
I think Ridge does as Ridge pleases. Cool. So a lot of dry farm head train, which we're moving more and more towards, and certainly myself, all the stuff that I buy for the Loma Jones stuff has that lean to it, just for a sense of place and et cetera, et cetera. So was it farmed
Yeah.
organically when you took over in '89? That's something
No, it wasn't.
right.
And in fact, at Monte Bello, it was. I mean, it was did the best they could and when they were doing their farming, but it was kind of following the North Coast regime, which up on the hills doesn't always work well. So it was full disc on everything, like you have to do when you're dry farming. But on the hills, sometimes the first rain of the season we get is pretty intense, and you can get a lot of erosion. I mean, I was, yeah. So the first thing that I kind of implemented was going to mow only between the rows so that you could keep cover on the ground, and that helps quite a bit with erosion. Especially when it actually rains. We haven't had a good rain in a long time, but but that's important. And then the other thing that I kind of segued into is trying to get rid of just doing what would you call it? Kind of schedule sprays, right? So we just spray if we need to. So you have to protect the vines from powdery mildew, right?
Yeah.
And that's pretty easy actually to change to organic. It's just that when you go from conventional to organic, you spend about the same amount of money, but conventional, you're spending a lot of your money on the chemicals because they're very expensive, and you can use 4 ounces an acre that lasts for 15 days or whatever. Organic, it's different. Sulfur is kind of our backbone chemical that we use for mildew control, and that you have to use 3 pounds an acre or 5 pounds an acre.
Right.
And so you're using a lot more of it, and you have to put it on more often. But so labor is much more important because sulfur is cheap, but labor is important, so they're expensive. So anyway, yeah,
we're on that same program. There's a lot of good products available to us, and
absolutely.
people seem to be moving back towards it pretty rapidly, is from what I hear. I mean, I've never farmed in the chemical way, but I hear a lot of resistance is building up. And Jordy, who worked for me recently, went to a seminar, and the guy giving the seminar was asked, well, what should we do? And he said, we'll go back to just using organic sulfur.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. It's awesome. Yeah, it's and the chemical companies, they shoot themselves in the foot. So they have these different the resistance is built up, and they have a great thing called frac codes. So it's a chemical class, and because mildew is a fungus, it's a bug, right? Or it's an animal, or plant, I guess. It mutates, and it can get around those defenses that the fungicide does. So in order to make their fungicide more saleable and more expensive, they combine 2 different chemical classes in it. So you're burning 2 of those numbers when you spray one chemical. It's just crazy. It's just ridiculous. But that's people. It's what Fred Peterson always said. It's better lives through chemistry. That's kind of the American myth, right? The Western myth. Yeah.
It seems to work for a while, but it seems that it's coming around, albeit a bit slowly. What was that question? Organic soil amendments that mitigate challenges of drought, green manure, biochar, etc.
Oh yeah, you had a lot of experience with that, Neil.
We've always done a lot of cover cropping and putting the cover crop into the soil. We've really just started getting into the biochar thing, which has been actually a lot of fun. We bought some from, I think it was Pacific Biochar last year, but it was kind of expensive. But now we've built our own little kiln, if you will, and we're charring any vines we pull out or canes that we don't use in compost. And as we clean the understory of the forests, we're burning that too, because we're trying to get stuff cleaned out for the sheep and for fire protection, etc. So basically taking a waste product and burning it in this kiln, we have pretty much a smokeless fire, kind of like one of those solo stoves you see so much these days. And so we're getting rid of waste product, not burning and creating a lot of smoke, and then we're putting char back into the soil, which, as with all these things, it's not going to be dramatic tomorrow, but in 20 years it's going to be dramatic to me.
That's it. And that's the same thing. We do quite a bit of composting every year.
Yeah,
and that's something that you need to just keep doing. Over time it does help.
It is kind of soul destroying when you spread 2 tons an acre of compost in the vineyard, and you can't even see it where you've just passed the tractor, right? It's like, does this really work? But it's
yeah.
running the sheep that we've been doing of late, for the last decade or so. Again, it's, that was never going to make a difference over a year or two, but now we're into it. And I think we really are seeing the benefit of that program, beyond the weed abatement. Now everywhere you walk in the vineyard, there's manure on the ground that was once weeds, which is super beneficial, and I think for us, that's an important part of our progression, not beyond organic, but an extension of organic, was to bring that diversity into our vineyard, and it'd be difficult with vineyards dotted around the place, but we're all self-contained. So it's working really well. I mean, a bit of a struggle in years like this where there just wasn't enough rain to create enough feed within the non-vineyard areas. And then you got to start supplementing, which becomes challenging. Yes. We just had this super cool thing happen though. Like, we were starting to have to buy feed from up on the Oregon border, because that's the only place we could find organic feed for animals, which then makes no sense. Now you're trying to farm organically and save tractor passes, and you're trucking feed. But a neighbor of ours, an old family, you're familiar with that. The Cherries had started going away from farming all their grains with the use of chemicals. They were seeing every year the productivity decline. And so he went and said, I'm not doing it anymore, and went to a no-till grain farming. And so we went and visited him, and super impressive, but was struggling a bit maybe with super picky horse breeders that were worried that there was some weeds within the feed and yada, yada. And he was struggling to get certified. So we kind of annexed him under our certification to help him get certified, and told him we'll buy his feed. And so now we're getting feed from 2 miles away.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
It's super cool. We just took our first barn full last week. So it also helps him, encourages him to keep going, because I think he's not getting a lot of love from his old buddies and neighbors. They're going, what are you doing farming no-till feed? But it's working, and his property looks great.
And in 10 years, that he'll be the one that survives. If he can stick out the first few years, he'll be the survivor. Yeah,
totally. I buy grapes from David Bailey, who farms walnuts organically, and he does better than all the neighbors doing the organic thing. Yep.
Hey, Adrian, right, Neil? Adrian Garcia. He's our assistant winemaker at Monte. Hi, Adrian. I don't know. We
shepherd's position right here. I think that's what he said.
Good Lord.
He wants to be a shepherd.
Yeah. If you want to do it, Adrian, I don't know. I worry about coyotes and mountain lions. We have plenty of both up here, but
in my relatively limited experience, is the only solution to, coyotes and mountain lions, donkeys and alpacas, but the dogs. We got 2 Spanish Mastiffs. I think they were probably there when Adrian was there. I'm not sure. Yeah. But we went from 1 year, we lost almost 30 sheep to a mountain lion.
Yeah.
We got the dogs, 4 years ago, I think, and we've lost 1 sheep since. And that sheep didn't even get out of the pen. It was left in the pen, killed but not eaten. The 2 dogs have been incredible. I mean, it's 100% almost, incredible job.
That's amazing. That's so great.
They're worth their weight in gold on social media too.
Yes, they are. They're huge.
Yeah, they are. Yeah. Let's taste this Carignan. See, I said I'd do it, and I did. So you can say what it is. I'll show the ball if I can figure it out.
Oh, you bet. So there you go. So Stan Buchignani. I saw him yesterday. It's up on the north end of Alexander Valley, off Dutcher Creek Road, close to Cloverdale. And he is 3rd generation. The vines were planted. Some of his grandmother planted some of the vineyard in the 1920s, so during Prohibition. And then his dad and his uncle finished it off in the early 50s. And he's done a lot of different things in his career, but for the last 20 or 25 years, he's been went back to home and was growing the grapes.
So how old is this planting?
Oh, so they range in age from planted in 1952 all the way to 1924, I think, is when the first vines were planted. There's a little bit of Zin on the ranch too, and he used to have some mixed whites, but they pulled those out.
So this is 100% Carignan, though, right?
Mm-hmm. This one is. We also make a Buchignani Ranch Zinfandel that has usually 20 or so % Carignan in it, and you can see the reason why. The Carignan's bright, fresh, lively acidity. I always say this is it's a perfect bistro wine, right? It goes.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
60 barrels produced it. So I love all the information that Ridge puts on the bottle.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I want to do it, but I think it's really cool that you do. 60 barrels made. It's super pretty, bright and fresh, vibrant. I mean, and Carignan's a bit of a mildew likes the Carignan, I'm told.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. If instead of having roses at the end of rows, that are really pretty, put a couple Carignan vines in, and you'll find mildew.
It's strange how that affects varietal to varietal. We just planted a grape called Vacarès a few years ago, and reading on it, it said it's susceptible to mildew, and we were a bit like, we're past the robles, it's hot, it's going to be fine. Wasn't fine. It was one of the worst mildew events we've ever seen this year. Wow. We're on top of it, but just like the difference in variety, it really was susceptible.
Yeah, it's amazing how that works. I
love this. I should join the wine club.
Yeah, huh?
I think Adrian would send me some, wouldn't you? Really? I mean, jeez.
You'd think. Oh, so Olivier, I would say it's the same variety as the French Carignan. The climate in the south of France, which is where they grow most of the Carignan, is kind of similar to the North Coast, except that California, it doesn't get summer rains, and so it's a long dry season. I expect that, especially this year.
Winter rains these days.
Yep, and but the great thing about Carignan is I think it's one of those. It actually came from Spain along with Mourvedre and Grenache, and so it doesn't mind the heat as much. So where Zinfandel, when it gets close to harvest, say they're just getting ready to pick Zinfandel, you have a couple of hot days and the sugar just goes boom up high. You've got to stay on top of it. Carignan, it just kind of pokes along every day, goes up a little bit, and so it just handles it better, and it keeps that beautiful acidity.
We're going to see more and more of that being planted, I would think. Those types of varieties. I mean, that's kind of going to be part of the climate change solution, I think.
Absolutely, I think so, and to that extent, and it's disappearing. It has disappeared quite a bit in Sonoma County. There's not very much. It used to be several thousand tons of Carignan, and now it's not even 1,000 tons sold in Sonoma County. We just planted another 6 acres of it, or a little over 5 acres. Sorry, last year. So we love it. It's great. It's natural. Yep. Natural acidity.
It's kind of hard to find down here. I'd like to play with some of that. I have to come up to your neck of the woods and try and dig some up.
For sure.
Yeah. So that's beautiful. And so Ridges, you're historically anyway, you've been largely an American oak house, right? Which is unusual these days.
Very much so, yeah.
And you've stuck by that, though. You've been a leader in that for sure. And I like it, And it seems to be you get away being the exception. All the American oak haters like Ridge.
Yeah, well, it's all about the barrels and about how you use them, right? So in this Carignan, it's about 15% new oak in it, and another maybe 30% 1 year, and then everything else are what we call neutral barrels, right? 2 or 3, 4, 5 years old that give the micro oxygenation, that the aging potential, that clarity that they give, but they don't give out any of the aromatics or the flavor that you get from newer oak. But it's all about how the oak barrels are well, not so much where the forests are, but how the wood is handled and made into barrels. And that's a kind of cool story. When Paul actually when Ridge was actually making enough money that they could buy barrels, in the old days, when Ridge wanted more barrels, they had an import license. We still do, and they would import either some Burgundy or some Bordeaux wine in barrel. It would come around the Horn or through the canal, and get to Oakland. They'd offload it, let it sit for a few months in the winery, and then when they thought it was ready to bottle, they'd bottle it up and sell it with the chateaus would always send a bundle of labels along with the wine. So you put that label on, and then on the back it'd say imported and bottled by Ridge Vineyards. Well, they did that for the cash flow, but also for the barrels, and they'd use those old barrels forever. And
Wow.
yeah. And then in the early 70s, Paul decided that he wanted to get some new barrels, and he wanted to do American oak barrels. And he did that because he looked at an old study from Bordeaux where American oak, along with Baltic oak, so, former Yugoslavia, did really well, actually was preferred by, I think, 10 different numbered growths in Bordeaux. They preferred those woods, long-term aging, versus center of France oak. So he said, well, if that's the case, let's try it out. So he went over to where the bourbon barrels were made in Kentucky and Missouri and taught them how to make wine barrels. So don't steam bend them, and use don't char the inside, just toast the inside.
I'd like to see the beginning of that conversation.
Exactly. And
I'm going to teach you how to make barrels.
Yep. Yeah.
There's some really, really good barrels coming out these days for sure from American oak. And I think what I've seen in my fairly limited experience is the learning to age the wood for longer than you do the French stage. I've been buying Canton 5-year aged barrels that are just incredible. Really,
those are amazing. And they're expensive, but they're amazing. They're great barrels.
They are expensive, but they're still not as expensive as a French barrel, I don't think. But
no, not nowhere near. Still, still quite a bit less. Yeah.
Expensive for an American barrel. So let's go Le Complice, which you have of Tablas Creek, 2018.
Mm-hmm.
This conversation could easily last 5 hours if we're not careful. There it is. So this is a wine interesting for me because it was, I think, a wine that Bob's left his footprint on. One of the last things that I remember sitting around the blending table, and we were tasting a grape called Terre Noire, which is one of the Chateauneuf varieties, really, really lesser known. I mean, you don't see it anywhere. But we had it in barrel. It's anything but noir. It's a really pale, almost rosé-ish in color, yet incredible structure. So it's a real strange grape. And we were tasting it, and he decided that we should build a wine around it, which seemed crazy to everybody sitting at that table at the time. So we decided to try and make a wine that was a little different than our normal stylistic choices. We did a more stem inclusion Syrahs, three new clones of Syrah that we had, and then softened it up with a little Grenache. Was the first vintage. This one is now 60% Syrah, 25 Grenache, and 15 Terre Noire. But if you know Terre Noire, you can taste it in here. It's very stands up for itself very well, even though it seems so pale. And then he decided he wanted to call it Le Complice, which is the accomplice, and he's referring to the Terre Noire as not being perhaps a standalone grape, but the accomplice in this blend. Kind of interesting. We get a lot of spiciness of the stem, but there's so much structure from that Terre Noire and from the Syrah. It's kind of cool.
I love it. I love the spiciness you're talking about, and that for me the structure it's perfect line of having. There's just enough bitterness on the aftertaste to clean your palate. So it's a nice long finish. It's so pretty on entry, and then it's just beautiful and elegant on the finish. It's a great wine.
For me, it's kind of funny that we tried to make a wine that stepped away from our normal style, but it ended up kind of being our style anyway.
Welcome to the club.
One trick pony down here. Try to do something different. It came out. I love it, and it ages incredibly well. I mean, it really, really does change as those stems integrate, and that spiciness kind of integrates throughout the wine. It's really a beautiful agent.
So Neil, is this all whole cluster? All three varieties?
No, of stems back in and whole cluster. We do a bit of both.
Fantastic.
And by itself, it's pretty aggressive, and I wouldn't want to bottle those Syrahs by themselves. But when you blend it into this component and it plays with that Terroir Noir, and then of course Grenache comes in and just kind of rounds out the party, if you will.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's beautiful wine.
Do you guys do a lot of whole cluster these days at Ridge?
No, we're not. We don't. We do a little bit with Petit Syrah, but we do more. We've started to do more, and that's where we would take like maybe a third of a tank, so a small tank, a 4-ton tank, something like that. We do maybe 1 ton of whole cluster, and then the rest is full crush on top. We also, what we love to do with Petit Syrah is kind of what we do with our Bordeaux varieties, which is basically pull the crushers out of the stemmer crusher. We pull the rollers back so that you destem everything, but then any whole berries that fall down don't get crushed. So that helps with Petit Syrah. Carignan, Zinfandel, full crush, because we want to get there. They don't have a lot of tannin, so we want to get that tannin out of it. And Syrah, we do whole berry. So I think we'll be experimenting a little bit though with some stem inclusion, because I think it adds a great component.
It really is something that I think it can be overdone quite easily, and there's some wines out there that I find too much. But where we bounce around the 20 to 30% ratio, same with our Pinot, and I think it really adds. I mean, this is intentionally quite a lot for me, but that was the intention for this wine. And someone asked, does it age? I think it ages incredibly well. I think it's fun to drink now, but I think, yes, that will age. The structure of this wine is made to age. It's a great aging wine.
Yeah, beautiful.
I'm liking that.
Yep.
So anything new on the horizon for Ridge? David Gates retiring and riding off into the sunset?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, besides the Napa Gamay, the Valdegui, we're always looking around for bits and this and that, and we'd made our first Pinot Noir a few years ago, 2018. The 2019, I think we learned a lot in 2018. So the 2019,
making Pinot Noir,
a little bit, yeah, just a little bit. We're still not 100% sold on it. So we're doing what Paul did in the 70s with Zinfandel, is trying a few different vineyards, small amounts, and see if something sticks. Right? It's like my mother-in-law: throw the spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks.
Right. Well, because as you know, we make a little bit of Pinot Noir.
Yes. Yeah.
Now
we have to compare notes.
Yeah. When you started buying the fruit from Adelaide, I told Adrian we're going to start making Zinfandel now at Tablas Creek. And
awesome.
Jason wasn't going for that, though.
Oh, darn.
Let's move on. We're going to save the Monte Bello for last. Let's go on. My best shot at standing up to your Monte Bello is the 2011, same vintage, the Panoplie. Those are people out there that don't know this wine. This would be the first selection of everything. We don't make very much each year. It's a very limited release, mostly to the wine club. This vintage is always based heavily in Mourvèdre. It's kind of so this is 60 Mourvèdre, 30 Grenache, and 10 Syrah. And it's kind of an homage to the homage of Jacques Perrin of Beaucastel.
It's beautiful, Neil.
This is a good age, I would think. I haven't gone into it yet. And this is a good moment for anyone out there who's listening to ask questions of David, and it's not often we get that opportunity.
So, Neil, did you decant your 2011 Panoplie?
Did I decant it?
Yes.
I did not. I decanted your Monte Bello, but I tasted it and I thought it would be fine without. So it's pretty soft.
Yes, and the nose, I didn't decant it either. On the nose, it's like opened up. It's been open now for about an hour,
Yeah.
And the glass is just like, oh my God, it's violets and black cherry.
It's got a lot of violets, got a lot of kind of gamey characters in a nice way, you know. Kind
Yeah,
of
absolutely.
It's kind of a wildness to it for sure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
11 was kind of a cooler vintage, as I recall, which I like. I like the cold ones personally.
Same here. The
Diane
best ones in California.
Someone opened a Panoplie to drink with us. Oh, a couple of weeks
Awesome.
ago. It is drinking great. I think it's in a good spot. It's a great softness to it.
It's beautiful. Yeah. I love the length to the finish, and I like that you can still have that little bit of grittiness from the Grenache that kind of tickles your tongue. It's awesome.
So, I mean, an interesting question. You know, people don't really look upon Zinfandel as being an age-worthy grape, I would say, in general. I'm not saying I'm saying that. I'm saying people. And I think Ridge would be an argument against that, right?
Yeah, but I would still say it depends on what you want out of your Zinfandel, right?
Okay.
The beauty of Zinfandel is that primary fruit, and it's so luscious, and that shows the best in the first 5 to maybe 8 years, something like that. If you have a site that gives you enough acidity to kind of hold the wine, and you don't try to get it too ripe, then they can age out beautifully. And some of I swear the 74 Geyserville, if you ever see it in an auction or a wine shop, buy it, because or 72 Lytton Springs. That was the first year we made it.
To do that?
Yeah, sure, yeah. I don't know how good it would be, but yeah. So you find a good vineyard site, make the wine well, and if it's in a good year, it can hold really beautifully. But you have to like older wines, right? They all kind of come together, where an old Geyserville will taste a lot like an old Bordeaux, or maybe a little less of the Pyrazines, or it doesn't always taste like Monte Bello because of the acidity of Monte Bello. But you always get this pure core of fruit. It's not fresh fruit anymore, but it's just like this essence of blackberry pie or something like that.
As someone that works in a winery, so spends a lot of my time tasting and consuming younger wines, when you get into an older bottle, it's definitely an adjustment that you have to make, to start thinking about the changed character. I mean, you're losing a lot of the fruit, and it's really fun. And I learned a lot from Robert Haas on that, because a few times I got to go eat with him at his house, and he opened old Burgundies, and it was just the first taste, you're kind of, well, I don't even know what this is, do I like this? And then as you learn to appreciate it, and it's such a treat, that was such a pleasure for me. That was a great learning curve.
Especially Bob's cellar. Oh my God, it's pretty.
Yeah, he never let me in the cellar. He would just
he's a smart man.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, this is showing really, really well. It needs food.
Yep.
What do we got? I may have missed this, but did Ridge start to focus in mine for the wine?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'll answer that by first starting in with Paul Draper, because he's kind of the key to Ridge and their evolution. I'd say our evolution. So the first winemaker, Dave Bennion, he didn't know anything about making wine. He learned it in textbooks, but he had a great site, and the wine came out really well. So Paul took that and looked at his learning, that the things that he liked. He looked at Emmett Rixford's book, The Cellar, and so anyway, he wrote it in the 1890s, and that kind of was his basis. He calls it pre-industrial winemaking, but it's basically just kind of making sure that the wine does what it's supposed to do, and not trying to interfere too much with that process. So that's what he started with, and then what I think the genius of Paul is that he would look at each individual vineyard site and try to make the best wine that he could from that. And that basically means making sure the grapes weren't super ripe, trying to make them balanced so there's not too much tannin. That's the main thing. And that goes along with not being overripe. And then making sure that it's aged in a way, like in small oak barrels, that doesn't mark the wine too much, but just accentuates the clarity of the wine. So that's kind of how he did it. It has evolved a little bit from there, just as technology's gotten better, and we do more press fractions in the Monte Bello so that it's not so rough when it's young as it used to be, and things like that. But no, it was kind of set by making sure that we show the vineyard in the wine. That's kind of what
even though Ridge is very traditional in its roots and in its perception, I would say. I know you, and I know particularly Eric, and I've met Paul luckily on a number of occasions, and I've sat down at the blending table with you guys. It's a very meticulous group of people.
Yeah,
that
helps.
Yeah, this is not a wing and a prayer. There's a lot of thought and a lot of tasting and trial goes into this, which has always been super impressive for me. I mean, it's such a strong group of people, right? I mean, and you've all been there for quite a while. I mean, Eric's probably the new guy, I suppose, right?
Yeah. I mean, he went through 25 years, and so it's that's
a
cool.
testament to a winery, in my opinion, for sure. And we just had this conversation earlier in the week. I brought my team up from Tablas to come to Ridge, and Chelsea, who's been working with me for a long time, Chelsea.
Yeah.
And they all know Ridge, and they all know my obsession and blah, 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 and they've tasted them. And that trip to Monte Bello blew their minds. I mean, they came back with a whole new perception of what Ridge is and what wine making is and what can and can't be done. And that the thoroughness and the attention to detail, spending a day with Eric going through the cellar and then having lunch with all of you guys and the conversation, it's just, there's so much depth there. And I couldn't have hoped for a better reaction from them all coming back. Just like, oh my God, thank you for that. That blew my mind.
Yeah, that was a fun day.
It was a fun day.
It was very fun.
It was a great tasting. Yeah. All right, so let's reach for the big boy. And this is, I can't say enough how excited I am for this business.
Yeah, it's fun to share this wine. So what we always do, Neil, is should
I let Eric have any, Ian have any of this? I don't know.
No.
Tech guy.
Yeah. So one thing we have been trying to do with Monte Bello is hold back a reserve, and then in 10 or so years start to release it. So we release it some to restaurants, because restaurants these days don't really buy wines and age them in their cellars anymore. But also for consumers, so that if we have people that are joining our club for the collector club for the first time, they want to try some older Monte Bellos, it's just a nice treat. And this wine has really opened up beautifully. And 11 was a cool year, but that's where I think it really, for me, those are the years, I agree with you, Neil, those are the years I most enjoy in California.
It's almost like the years where it really kind of struggles to get to that ripeness, that's the ones where you get the highest reward, is always seems to me.
Absolutely. And the other great thing for consumers is the wine critics typically don't like those years, so they don't rate the wines as high. And then in the secondary market, those wines go for cheaper. So you get a good deal. Yeah.
So talk to us. I mean, you should talk to us a bit about this, because this is not an everyday California Cabernet Sauvignon. There's a history and a pedigree to this wine that is second to nothing in this country, I would say.
Well, thanks, Neil. We've been making Monte Bello every year since 1962. That's what Ridge was founded on: Monte Bello Cabernet, Monte Bello Chardonnay. In the early or mid 70s, 74, I think, we started to incorporate Merlot into the blend as it matured. We planted, so the vines were planted in 69 and 70, some Merlot vines. And then in the 80s, we started adding Petit Verdot and Oh, and also in the 70s, a little bit of Cab Franc. So those are the 4 varieties that have the potential to go into this wine. But nothing goes into that wine unless it creates a better blend. So we have a few lots, and so Monte Bello is several ranches on Monte Bello Ridge, but it's mountainous, so they're not all contiguous, right? They're little bits and pieces of less than 30% or 50% slopes that you could actually plant grapes on. And each of those has different varieties planted on it, different aspects, and different elevations. And so as the grapes get ripe, we separate those into many different lots. Sometimes it's 60, 70 different lots that are fermented separately. Some of them are so small that we have to combine them right after harvest, but most of them we keep them separate until they finished with their primary fermentation to make alcohol and their secondary fermentation to change the malic acid to lactic acid, which softens the wine a little bit. Then we evaluate the lots, and the very best of them become Monte Bello, and that's a fun process. Although tasting really young, extracted, acidic wines is brutal. It can take your
so much fun.
Yes, so much fun. The fun part, Neil, is when you finally finish after the second day and you think you have your best blend. Then we taste it against the last 4 blends of Monte Bello to make sure that it is in that same strain. That's when it's fun. But,
yeah, no doubt. And I mean, let's not skip mentioning the award, the great tasting that it won in France, right? That's this wine.
Oh yeah, so the Paris tasting. The 76 Paris tasting, the 71 Monte Bello came in middle of the pack, so it was presentable. It's good. It was it did well. The Stags Leap wine won, which shocked the world, right?
Right.
They did a reenactment of the Paris tasting in 2006, and it was in 2 components. They took the original wines, and we kind of thought the 71 was going to do well because it was holding up nicely, and some of the other wines that we had the opportunity to taste over the years had started to fade, and of course the 71 hands down. And they did the tasting one at Copia in Napa and outside of London. So they had European palate and California palate judges tasting it. And so that was expected slightly, but still very gratifying that the 71 was like hands down the favorite, both continents. But the second component of that tasting was more recent vintages where people, Bordeaux, and it wasn't Bordeaux against California, it was California against California and Bordeaux against Bordeaux to find the best wine. But they looked at the scores, and we put in our 2000 Monte Bello. Everybody else in Napa put in their 2001 because they love that vintage. And Bordeaux was mostly 2001, and the 2000 Monte Bello had the most points of all of those wines. So that made me feel proud because that was a wine that I had something to do with. But that just shows you the ageability of Monte Bello. And the 71 is still beautiful today. It's fading a little, but it's still a beautiful wine. But you have to like older wines.
Kind of feel like you should have done that for this tasting, really.
Yeah, huh? Yeah, that would have been fun.
So, I mean, I'm not, Tablas Creek doesn't make we do make a very, very small bit of Cabernet, but such incredible aromas. I mean, such dark berries and there's a great wildness again to this that I find really intriguing. Really not a lot of the green Pyrzini stuff that people would particularly in a cooler vintage like 11 be complaining about. It's super
there. Yeah, it's there, but it's more.
It's there, but it should be there.
Yes, exactly. It's more kind of in the mint range, right? A mint and grass range, as opposed to straight on bell pepper or something. And I liken they're small vineyard parcels, right? They're surrounded by brush. It's not garrigue, but it's just about a chaparral, and it's a lot of native California plants.
You feel it in it.
Yes, Herba Santa, Herba Buena, lots of very aromatic, and that gets into the grapes, absolutely. It's
I
part
think
of
we
that.
need to recognize those terms more. The Yerba Buena is a great call out. We have that growing by the creeks at Tablas, and there's like this really intense black currant in this too that I
Yes.
find,
Yeah.
and just long and balanced, and the acidity is great. Tannin structure is super, but not dry or overbearing. It's showing beautifully at this time, but also incredibly young still, right?
Yes, yeah. So, and one thing with Monte Bellos is I always say most of them go through kind of a dumb period where you have, you lose all that primary fruit, and then the wine just tastes disjointed. It's either too fruity and not enough tannin, or too tannic and not enough fruit, or too much oak is showing. And that's usually from years 3 to 8, something like that. And then they come out of that, and the 11 has come out of that. It did not taste very interesting, 4 years ago, 3 years ago. Last year it started to come around, and so this year we decided to re-release it, since it's been 10 years since it vintage. The only wine that I've been associated with, the only Monte Bello that I've been associated that didn't have that kind of dumb period was 91, which is another incredibly cool vintage. And it was very elegant. We weren't sure we were even going to make the wine, and it's ageless. It's like an amazing wine.
That's so gratifying when that happens.
Yes, I totally agree. It's just amazing, and it's really
my
fun.
first vintage on the property at Tablas Creek when I'd just gone back from France. I can't imagine how I would react to this today, but I don't think we started picking grapes until October.
Oh my God.
It's such a cool vintage, and everyone was, it's not going to last. And the wine is still tasting wonderfully.
Yep.
It's like we know nothing sometimes.
Yep. Trust the process, right? Trust
exactly. I don't know what I would do if we were that deep without picking grapes at this point. I don't think I have that level of bravery anymore. But.
And or space, right?
That too. This is spectacular. It really is. Once in a while you taste a wine, and it kind of reminds you why you do what you do. It just kind of jolts the memory that, oh God, sometimes it can be this, which I think is incredible. You know what, David? It's 6 o'clock, so it's time for you to go to bed, probably, right?
Yeah, maybe get dinner. Maybe, I don't know. Just about. Yeah.
Or go out dancing. Maybe it is. I don't know.
But Neil, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for inviting me and for sharing your wines.
Next time you come to Tuesday, let's go have dinner in town.
Absolutely. Let's do that. And thanks for sharing the case too. Cheers.
You're very welcome. Cheers.
Yep.
Well, say hi to everyone up there.
I'll do that.
I'll send Adrian a half dozen sheep to start working with.
Yeah. Watch out, the guys might eat them.
They'll eat them.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Thanks.
So much.
Thanks
Good time.
a lot. Yep,
Cheers.
see you.